Now that the old transmission's out of there, check and make sure that you got two dowel pins. One typically in the back stays in the engine, and then one in the front stays in the transmission. And it has, and the used one has the one in the front in it. And I've got the 14mm one in the back. It's still in there. You gotta make sure those are in there. You'll cause excess wear on the front of the transmission working. But it's just a matter of lifting the other one back up there and lining those dowel pins up. Kind of see where the torque converter makes contact here and there. So make sure the torque converter don't have any rust buildup on it on its face. And the flywheel's not damaged or cracked in the middle. And roll the other one under there and start raising it up into position. And definitely keep the core transmission until get the used one working in case I need any sensors off of it. I'm going to finish doing some prep work to this used transmission replacement. I'm going to transfer this ground bracket on the front and take this transfer unit off. And I got drain pan in there because there's probably still some transmission fluid waiting in there. Really stuck on there. Spray it down with some penetrating oil and let that pressure sit on it for a while. I don't want to bust the housing. That transfer unit took the better part of 6 hours to get it off there, and just broke the prying tit off of it, but the rest of it's still intact somehow. All these chisels and punches, shims. It is really gold into this circle. And I didn't have it jackknifed or anything either. It's really wedged in there. What a mess. But it doesn't look like it has any extra transmission fluid in there anyway. And check, make sure your unit's got hypoid oil in it. This one's just about filled up. I took some time and slid the transmission around so it's centered on a jack. It sits on there by itself, and you can jiggle it a little bit and it still stays centered. So it's relatively safe per se. But those angles may change as it goes up, so it'll have to be held at all times. But I just took a washer and put a bent place on it to hold the torque converter back, and put it in a 10mm bolt hole in the very center of the bell housing. And once it gets close enough where the dowel pins will start getting in alignment, I'll go ahead and remove that bolt and let the washer fall out. But the torque converter needs to stay back in there until it's bolted back into place. It's home. I gotta start jacking it up. I've got all the known bad stuff off of it, or problems, stuff that's going to be in the way off. To do it took a long time. I took some sandpaper and cleaned the gristle off and sprayed the debris off of it. It's something else. And any place like I had a chisel at the end there around these bolt holes, And if there was any raised up places, took a razor blade and skinned them off. And both there and on the transmission, if there was any places on it. A little bit, not much. Looked out. Going right up there. It's not too bad, but keep in mind I'm using a 3-ton jack. It covers quite a bit of distance as far as lifting and being spread out under here. Can't use a cheap jack for this for sure. I always keep a hold of it so I can feel what the center of gravity is doing as it goes up, and the jack's going to pull the transmission back towards you as it goes up, so it should be forward of the transmission, forward of the engine slightly, and watch it don't get caught on a dowel pin. And just keep a hold of it and make slight adjustments to it, because it gets caught on something, then lets go all of a sudden if you load it down, and then you could lose it fast. Gangway, it will do some damage, and you'll be buying somebody's transmission. Okay, this long bolt that was in the back, I've been bringing it up front so I can get it started first. I'm getting close enough where this washer is going to have to be taken out. It's holding the torque converter back. The torque converter is almost centered. With the flywheel on the crankshaft. It's real close. Now you can be looking at a dowel pin lined up in front here, and it'll be off in the back, something appears. These fine threads aren't too forgiving for misalignment. One of them in there. It's a little more stable to deal with now anyway. I think it's still downhill just a tad. And it's two of them started, so it should be good to go to press together. I might lift it up just a hair more. Yeah, and see now I got some movement in the bolts. I'll slide it over. Stuff the dowel pins together and start putting the bolts in it and tightening them up. That didn't hurt a bit. Very tedious, so it's typically not going to hurt you once you got two bolts, 5 or 6 threads into it. But it's still not to be trusted. I'll get the rest, get it stuck together, and then it'll be good. Then it'll be more or less hinging off this jack and that jack and the chain up there holding the motor up. And then you're in business. It liked it. Went ahead and started installing all the torque converter bolts. It did have an order of alignment. Just lucky that I just pushed it one bolt hole over and they've all lined up. I made about 3 passes making them finger tight until the flywheel settled against the torque converter, and it should be in business. The torque converter bolts with 10mm heads on them, tightened down. Supposed to be about 8 foot-pounds. I'm going to go with 10 foot-pounds. I put the transmission bell housing bolts down to 45 foot-pounds. And these front engine mount bracket bolts tightened down to 28 foot-pounds on the 4-wheel drive model. I raised the motor up so it's just above level inside the vehicle. I slipped the frame back underneath of there in general alignment with the bolt holes for the corners, and fed the high pressure line up as it went up. About the only thing that needs to be happening first before lining the steering column. The back of the frame is preferred to be up and the back of the motor tilted down, so they should kind of overlap one another in the back to get that metal piece around the corner of the differential on the back of the transmission. Now the stub shaft's up through the hole slightly, but it's still not time to align it till we get done with all this other crap. The idea is the back of the frame up and the back of the motor tilted down and let the frame walk forward, so we can get that front mount lined up with its hole. I'll stick a big screwdriver in there and work it around until it drops in, and get these side mounts generally in place, and that can pick the motor and frame up at the same time by using the frame, and then adjust the stub shaft back into the coupling. But it's not too bad as long as you keep the motor solid and be able to adjust the frame on both sides with 2 jacks. We just about got that thing. Might jiggle it around and get it to drop in its hole. Make sure those bracket bolts are tightened down to 28 foot-pounds. And all your bell housing bolts are in, the torque converter bolts are in. I'm going to put the inspection cover back on. And there's nothing getting bound up. It's not running into the radiator or cooling fans. Too bad. And the wire harnesses aren't getting crushed. Or no, their line's getting stressed out. It's going pretty good. I'll get this mount dropped into this front slot and the end mounts on there. Go from there. The mount slipped down in there. I've kind of let the motor almost down on the frame, not quite. But I'm going to put a couple of threads on this front mount nut and this rear mount. The holes are lined up. I'm going to stick a couple of short bolts in it. Okay, the nut's on there. It still needs to go down about 1 inch to line up these side mounts. But the rear mount bolt holes are about lined up. I get a couple in it. Went ahead and took the chain loose from the downpipe. Front mount's in, the rear mount's lined up. These 2 side mounts are going in loosely. I'll probably zap them on the transmission, just leave the nuts off the frame for now. Still got the stub shaft to line up. The frame's down about 1 3/4 inches. I got both floor jacks on both sides of the frame about 5 or 6 inches forward of the lower control arms, and this jack stand to stabilize it toward the back, but they're more centered under the engine. And get ready to line the coupling up was a stub shaft. That orange yellow plastic piece that was in there was just for the factory use to assemble this. It's not required. So the frame bolts won't necessarily line up with our holes till the frame's almost against the body. Since the engine's still hooked to the other side, it's going to be at an angle pushing the frame away till it gets up to where it was previously. I'm going to go inside and get a hold of that steering link and hook it onto the sub shaft, get it started on the mark. I'd put a mark out here too for convenience. Let's see what's going on. And the chain's completely loose at what hangs the engine, so I can move it around underneath as needed. And I think it's just about a tooth off. So I can go up front and move the jack forward and move the frame away to get the slack I need to move it over a tooth. Once you're satisfied your mark's in the line, then run the frame on it close to the body and stick a skinny screwdriver in there to line the bolts holes up. And start putting the frame bolts, stiffening brackets back in to the corners. There's one laid out. There's the other one. And the other one's up underneath each corner in the back. Get the frame back into the position it was sitting on the body. Just left a nice imprint of the rubber bushings on the body. So I'm going to slide the frame around until it's centered up good with them. Not that there's a whole lot of movement around the bolts anyway. But we'll get it stabilized and start unhooking some of this crap off of it. The jacks and chains and everything. Start putting it back together. Get the transmission plugged in. Get the mounts tightened down. The pinch bolt goes through there, tightens it down to 16 foot-pounds. After you get the frame up against it, be sure not to fasten this down until you've got the frame bolted on. Because if the jack lets go or something and the frame drops, it'll rip the guts out of the steering column. Possibly. All 4 frame through bolts tighten to 75 foot-pounds. And these front bracket stiffeners, the 17 millimeters of them, tighten to 55 foot-pounds. And the rear stiffener, 17 millimeter, tightens to 86 foot-pounds on the back of the frame. The rear engine mount bolts tighten to 30 foot-pounds. I'm going to lube up the intermediate shaft with some Honda automatic transmission fluid and a seal in the transmission with it. These bolts tighten to 30 foot-pounds on the intermediate shaft bearing of the engine. Then put the heat shield in with it. And while I'm over here, I'll plug the power steering pressure switch back in. Tighten down the clamp bolt on the line. Put it back in the fasteners and hook the rubber hose with a new clamp onto the return line. I'm going to go ahead and stick this transfer on there. 7 bolts in it. And 1 dowel pin tube. Don't forget that. It falls out of there readily on this one anyway. Check the surfaces for flatness on it and the transmission. Clean any gristle off from around it. Make sure this companion flange for the drive shaft's flat, relatively rust free, and the center's clean to accept the drive shaft inside there, the guide. And I'm going to lubricate the seal on the transmission and this tube up with Honda transmission fluid. And stick the 7 bolts in it, and they tighten down to just under 40 foot-pounds. 39. And then the drive shaft bolts, they tighten down to 53 foot-pounds, all 4 of them. And hook up the vent tube and oxygen sensor wire holding bracket, 10mm bolt in the center back there. And finally, if you took this front drive shaft hanger loose, 12mm in it, and these rear bolt retainers, they're 30 foot-pounds, and these corners, 17mm, are 85 foot-pounds. I think I mentioned it earlier. Get all this back work done. Start getting the axles and wheels put back on it, exhaust. I've lubricated up the end of the axle shaft on the driver's side with some Honda transmission fluid, just all over it, and lubricated the seal. I'm going to slip it in there. They say use new clips on these, but I don't think it'll be a problem. Just keep the dirt out of it. Just get it started back in there and just shove it as hard as you can real quick so it seats. That clip expands on the other side of the side gear in there. Then tug on the metal housing a little bit, make sure it stays and doesn't slide back out. Clean the end of the axle splines if they need it, and get it started in the spindle. And stick a bar into the lower control arm hole and pry it down, and put the lower ball joint back into the spindle. The lower ball joint tightens down to a few pounds either side of 45 foot-pounds. So it could be like 42 or 50 foot-pounds. Line up one of the slots and put the safety clip back into it. Make sure none of the ball joint spindle holes are oblong, and if any of the nuts is loose, the spindle should be replaced, and that any of the ball joints don't have gouged out places, flat places on them from being loose. They should be replaced along with the spindle if that has happened, the nuts come loose on it. Tie rod ends go down to 40 foot-pounds, and reinsert your quarter pin key, a new one preferably. And this is an excellent time to verify that the wheels are straight ahead and that the steering wheel is pointed straight ahead. Looks good to me. The stabilizer link tightens down to 60 foot-pounds. Nut on it. And the axle nut tightens down to 210 foot-pounds. Then restake the nut by using a punch and dent the side of it into the keyway on the axle. Do the same thing to the other side. It's pretty much identical other than the fact the axle is sliding onto the intermediate shaft and it doesn't need lubricated as far as transmission fluid. Just a splotch of high pressure axle grease on the splines. The brake caliper mounting bolts are like 25 foot-pounds, 27 to fasten them down. Be sure you fasten your bolt down for the rubber hose. I'm going to go ahead and bring the exhaust up, take them old donut gaskets out, stick 2 new ones in it. They're just metal rings with gasket material between the metal. Just flip them out of there. Run a drill brush over your manifold surfaces, make sure it's pretty flat so it'll seal good. Just drop them in a little track they're sitting in. Mouse over the video and hit the circle I to continue to part 2 of the video.